If I could change the script of this world and that we live in, I would remove all grades from secondary school. It's not about grades. It is the first 4 or 5 years. You get the opportunity to learn about something that lights you up and there's no pressure.
We love busting this myth or this paradigm that the older you get, the more serious you've got to be.
Play is one of the most wonderful ways that children make sense of their world.
Play is synonymous with learning. They're connected, they're one and the same. Often we separate them.
Podclass acknowledges the traditional and true custodians of the land we meet on here today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We're grateful to be here.
Today, we are thrilled to be welcoming Lael Stone to the podcast. Lael will be a familiar name and possibly even a familiar face for many of our listeners, but for those who might not have come across her work, she is a renowned speaker, educator and author, and her work is all about championing the emotional well-being and the authentic voices of children. She's been a guiding force for parents, educators and anyone working with young people, helping them to connect more deeply with the children in their lives and promoting emotional awareness at every stage. I did go to write a list of all the incredible projects and work and experience that Lael has, and I started to do this, but it would have gone for the entire length of the episode. So to just give you a few of the points, Lael's journey began in childbirth education and postnatal care. She's worked as a doula, a calm birth practitioner and a postnatal trauma counsellor. She has run sex education programs for high school students, and she's co-hosted 123 episodes of the Aware Parenting podcast. She's also the visionary behind Woodline Primary, a school that places connection at the core of education. I think though, personally speaking, from being around Lael's work and implementing so many of her practices into my own education philosophies, what I love most is the authenticity that she brings to everything that she does. We are beyond thrilled to have her joining us on the podcast today.
So no one told you teaching was gonna be this way. Your lesson plans are jokes, your patience broke, you're feeling in disarray. It's like you're always stuck in report writing, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your school year. But I'll be here for you
when the students start to riot.
I'll be here for you
even if your coffee's gone cold.
I'll be here for you 'cause you're there for them too.
Hello team and welcome back to Podclass. We are here with Australia's Brené Brown, Lael Stone, and this is the one about using play to connect.
We absolutely admire Lael and everything you do. Hello, by the way.
Hi.
Hello.
Part two.
It's great to have you. What we are wanting to delve into in this episode is about using play to connect. What we know and what we see in young people through their behaviours, but also what we see in the data is that this idea of play and creativity and wonder and curiosity is, you know, it's so natural and it's such a naturally motivating aspect of being human. And we see this kind of sadly peak at like 5 years old and then drastically decline, you know, at like by 10 and through teenagehood. And then as adults, it feels like we're so often so fixed.
And we also see in our school systems in such crammed curriculums that often there's kind of this notion that there's no room or there's no time for play because we have to get through all of this content and we have to meet these markers. And we kind of don't really agree with that. And we thought you might be on our team in that department about play. But we would love to hear, like, why is play so important and such an essential part, not just for our, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds in primary school, but for our secondary school students as well?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful topic. So let me talk about it in the context of little kids for a minute, and then I'll jump into the teenage space. Play is one of the most magical ways that children learn. And there's that beautiful quote, I'll have to try and find it and send it to you, that says something like, when children are learning something, when they learn it through play, it takes like 6 repetitions for them to get it. But if they're not doing it through play, it takes something like 180 or something. I've just completely butchered whatever that data was. But anyway, it basically speaks to that when children play and they're doing it with the freedom where they not even necessarily know that they're learning, that's when that learning cements in their body and their being. Now, also, I think the things about play, which is really powerful, is that for me, the way I see play is one of the most wonderful ways that children make sense of their world, but it also has properties around healing for when there's been trauma. And it also is an amazing way to connect. So if we look at the sense of learning, when kids are playing in the sandpit, you've got a group of 7-year-olds playing in the sandpit and they're going to make a sand village. There is so much learning going on there around negotiation, around how do we keep the bucket up here, and is that too heavy? There's often beautiful numeracy that's happening as they're playing in creating this beautiful world that's going on. So children are constantly learning just through that play. So when we can see the value of play in the sense of how it can help children process, emotions, feelings, connecting, learning, it's just so valuable. And then I think also the part that I find really powerful is the healing aspect of play. So when children have big experiences in their world, when they have to go to the dentist or the doctor or there's a car accident or something happens, when you give children the right space, they will play out what happened in order to make sense of that in their world. And so one of the most beautiful things that we can do with children, and I worked for a long time with families with kids that had trauma, is give them spaces to play in and watch when it was safe enough what they would play in order to process what's going on. This is why play therapy is like my number one therapy for children. People will say, I need to take my child to a psychologist. And I'm like, I love psychologists, but I'm like, play therapy is so valuable for younger children, because what it does is that actually through their play, they process what's going on and we get a better insight into actually what the hurt is underneath, because it's often not a cognitive mental thing that they're trying to make sense of. It's the shock, it's the trauma, it's what's going on in their body that they then play out. So we see the healing aspects of play are just magnificent. And also play brings us connection. So when we have adult with the child play, we go into the child's world, we are there and we are present. We're not looking at our phone or those kind of things. It builds an even greater connection. We get to understand our child more and the child feels seen, right? So we know that there is so much magic. Yet what happens, exactly as you said, is that as they get older, the play gets less because we have this expectation that children shouldn't want to play anymore. But I guarantee you, if you put massive boxes of Legos in front of a whole lot of 14 or 15-year-olds, they would start playing Lego, right?
You put it in front of me, Lael, and I'll start playing Lego.
If you put Lego in front of me, I'll start playing with it, right? Totally. Well, you put Play-Doh in front of someone, you just automatically start building something.
I feel like we love busting this myth or this paradigm that the older you get, the more serious you've got to be.
And I think as well,
so
what
boring.
we're hearing is
Used to accept
it is boring, but also that play is like synonymous with learning. Like they're connected, they're one and the same. And I think often we separate them, like play and learning or play and processing are these two different things and their worlds apart.
About too from a point, like we look at the body as well. What happens is when primary school, we have monkey bars and we have things to swing on and climb on and all that kind of stuff. And we get to secondary school and we've got an oval and some basketball rings. Yeah. That's it. Right. And I'm like, as teenagers, they need to move their bodies as well. And again, I think if we had monkey bars and swings and things for them to move on or things to climb, they would probably do it as well, which we know is also awesome for the body as it explores and plays as well. So I think, we kind of create this secondary school environment where we remove all the playful stuff. We remove all the kind of risk-taking things that our bodies are meant to do. And then we're making you sit at a desk and just regurgitate this information. Whereas we know a lot of humans don't do well just sitting there doing that rote learning. They need to move their bodies. They need to discuss with other people about it. They need to feel it in their hands. I mean, I look at my son was an athlete. He still is his whole life. And secondary school for him was torturous because he just wanted to have a ball at his feet and kick it all the time. That was his magic. And it was so hard getting him through school because he was just like, it doesn't even make sense to me. I just need to move my body. And then when he went to Cedar for year 11 and 12 and was in the soccer academy there and he loved it. He absolutely just thrived because it was all focused on something he loved. He could move his body. It was literally play. He got to play right for year 11 and 12 and in a world that made sense to him and he absolutely thrived. Right. And there's a lot of kids like that, I think, whether it's sport or whether it's creativity or whether it's just, figuring out who you are in other ways. I think we need to kind of pull back how we do it to be looking at how do we incorporate more play, more fun, more, again, choice and autonomy like we talked about before in how we take in this information.
And I'm curious, like, do you feel, Lael, that like in a classroom, the standard way that you're meant to learn is by sitting and writing? How does a teacher have that conversation where they justify play to a point where a principal or someone in leadership isn't like, you're just playing games?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is sometimes, and this is what we are as humans, we need evidence, don't we? It's what we always go, show me the evidence, right? And sometimes we know anecdotally that this is working.
Sorry for interrupting you, Lael, but show me the evidence that the sitting and writing works.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
There's probably more evidence that the play works.
Yes,
well, this experience works.
Yeah, this is it. And it's we can measure academics easily, right? Because we can give someone a test, we can, see how they go on it, and then we have this benchmark of this is how we're doing academically. How do we measure well-being? Yeah. How do we measure connection? How do we measure, a sense of calm or just, feeling connected to ourselves? And I think this is one of the things we've struggled with at Woodline is we have so much anecdotal evidence of what we're doing is working, but it's very hard to measure it. It's very hard to be like, this is the child before they came, this is the child after they've been here, this is what we've seen. Yet the parents tell us and then we observe it with these children. And so we see what we're doing, but it's hard to measure it. So I know that when we are trying to do things differently, there is always this risk factor that goes on. You've got those early adopters who are like, I believe in this, I'm going to do it. And so then they do it. And that's kind of what I felt like we did a bit with Woodline. And then what happens is when you do that, then you get all the criticism of that's not going to work and what are you doing? But, you have to stay true to yourself to be like, I just know that this is going to work. And then years later, people go, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe we should do that. And then 20 years later, hopefully everyone's copying you, which I hope is what happens, right? That people go, yes, let's change it and let's do it in a different way. Yeah. And I think the thing is, for educators, I would be coming back to, let's see what happens if we do it this way for a few weeks. Yeah. What am I noticing? Do I notice the kids are happier to come to class? Do I notice that they're more engaged? Do I notice that we're laughing more? Am I noticing that the learning is landing in a different way? We have to be willing to try it and to sit in the uncomfortable of the unknown. And sometimes it won't work and sometimes it does, but we have to give it a go. For me, that is the challenge or the invitation is to be like, well, what would happen if we did do it? And let's go in without, with just being so open to possibility here and seeing what comes back to us. We are going to learn something no matter what happens here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would be curious to actually reflect on, we're talking about this traditional kind of sitting, writing, getting good grades, like, how much of our young people, what percentage of the population of our young people does that actually work for? Yeah. I think so often we attach play, play is synonymous with like child innocence and childlike nature versus I think what we're really possibly talking about here is a purely intellectual experience of learning versus a felt experience of learning, a beingness experience of learning.
100%. I think it's also people's definitions of what play is. Like play, yes, is on, the playground. That's play, sure. But I think about, I'm an English teacher and a media teacher by trade. And I think about how do you bring play into the English classroom? And we would be doing like role plays or storytelling can be a form of play. And there's all these other ways that we can play that aren't just, it's not Monopoly and, rolling your dice for a game. Like play is a very big thing and there's lots of scope to do different stuff within that.
Absolutely. I love that you said that because I think about myself as a learner. I am a deeply emotional learner, which means unless there's a story connected to it and I can relate to it emotionally, the information just doesn't go in. So I've tried many times, right? But I'm like, hang on, tell me more about that. And if someone explains it to me in a story or in the context of real life, I'm like, yes, I get that. I understand it. And I use storytelling all the time in all my talks. Like the main thing I do is tell stories because I think it lands in a different way. Certain amount of brains love data. They love, facts and that's beautiful. But I think that the challenge is getting to know who we are as a learner and how we get the best out of ourselves. Now that for me would be another beautiful thing. If we had a class and an educator and the educator is like asking them all the question, what do you know about yourself? Where does information land for you? How do you learn best? What do you need to learn best? I mean, I think how powerful if we asked our students those questions so that we then get a bit of an understanding about who they are and how that makes sense for them. And then we can play with that a little bit to help them get the information in the way that makes sense.
And I think being okay as well as educators of doing a bit of trial and error and having fun ourselves as we're kind of experimenting and working out what does land for our students and inviting them to be a part of the conversation. When I was teaching, I would do an end of term survey every term to kind of get feedback on my own practice from the students in my class. And I would always say, like, was there a standout moment or a favorite lesson or something that we did this term that really resonated with you? And I remember when I was up teaching in Darwin, I was teaching Shakespeare's Macbeth. And one of the crazy things I did, well, not crazy, it was really fun, was I came in a witch's hat and I had a cauldron that actually smoked and kind of bubbled, and we did the opening kind of witch scene, like the bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. And all the students, but that was like what they wrote in their feedback form was like, oh, the lesson where you were the witch and there was the cauldron. And it was like, because it was such a standout, playful experience for them, it's also embedded the learning so much more than just reading the play.
The memory,
or watch it, you know?
They remember so much more as well.
And do you know, I think, I mean, when we talk about, this is a bigger conversation about education, but I think we're often forcing children to learn stuff they've got no interest in.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but when I have to sit down.
So true.
Yes,
Will?
Indeed.
Will is very passionate about this.
Yeah, I had to do the other day, I'm on the board of my school, and I had to do a risk compliance seminar, which I can have to tell you was like the most dry, not exciting topic ever. But I'm like, and I had to sit there for 90 minutes and I am like, oh my God. And I had to do it because it's part of my regulation of what I needed to do.
Compliance doesn't get you out of bed in the morning. What does?
Well, honestly.
It doesn't, but I was like, I had a moment where I was like, oh my God, this is what teenagers feel like every day at school. Learning something that maybe they don't have an interest in. Now, again, in a whole, if I could change the script of this world and that we live in, what I would do is I would remove all grades from secondary school, right? It's not about grades. It is the first 4 or 5 years of secondary school where you get the opportunity to learn about something that lights you up and there's no pressure around it. And you try it on. Do I like using my hands? Yeah, that feels good. How do I feel about literature? Yeah, actually, I really dig that. No, I don't like that. Where we actually give them the opportunity to explore, to figure out who they are without the pressure of these grades. And then hopefully by the time they get to like 17 or 18, they've got a bit more of an idea of what lights them up and maybe they move towards that. I saw this beautiful thing on Instagram, TikTok, whatever it was, because, that's our life these days. And this guy was talking about, he was a teacher's aide and he was in like year 10 biology or something. And he does this whole piece to camera where he's like, I was assisting this student in year 10 biology and gosh, the class was so fascinating and I was really impressed with how much work the teacher put into her presentation. So the point where he went up to her afterwards and went, wow, that was a fantastic presentation, because he said, at 26, I'm actually interested in this. But when I was 16, I could not give a shit.
Yeah.
And he goes, I'm like wondering if we actually need to go back to school as adults to be like, oh yeah, that lights me up. And he said, at 16, I had zero appreciation for the work the teacher had put in. I was there because I didn't want to be. It was boring. No information went in. He said, but as a 26-year-old, I was like, that's amazing. Yeah. And I thought, it is so true, right? It is so
as
true.
As a 16-year-old, what we spoke about last week was like, all of a sudden he's controlled to think about this now, whereas at 26 he's made the choice and has the autonomy to think about it. Right?
Yeah, he's not attending by law, going to school. Like he's,
the curiosity is actually like self-generated.
And interestingly, I do feel like, because the reality is we, nearly all of our teachers are in this structured system, and some to a certain extent it's about exploring personal curiosities and passions. And I do also think that there's so much power in how we as a teacher facilitate and meet curiosity, because we're natural learners as humans, right? We're naturally curious. And so, have we set it up to be a lesson sharing about the statistics of the biology of this particular plant? Or are we connecting to prior knowledge? Are we tapping into wonder and curiosity and exploration to then, even if a student doesn't necessarily connect with biology, we're going to have a lot more traction if we're doing it that way.
And that's the question,
100%.
right, is can play be used to bridge that gap between that, hey, I'm not really interested in learning about Shakespeare or this biological, I'm an English teacher, biological term. But I am, but I can do that if my teacher puts in that effort to have play in the classroom, or we've got permission to have fun with this. Suddenly this could be something that I'm interested in learning about.
Or even just making sure it connects to prior knowledge and prior curiosity,
Yeah. I love all those things. Yes, I so agree with everything you're saying there. One of the things that we do at Woodline, which is our principal, has this beautiful open door that if a child has an idea or a wondering, they write a letter to the principal of like, I'm thinking we need this. And so over the years, there was a little boy who was really into frogs, but he's like, but, we have no frogs at our school. How can we bring frogs? And she's like, well, what do you think we need? And then he's like, I think we should create a frog pond. And she's like, all right, what do we need to create the frog pond? So then all this learning happened because he then had to research where could we put the frog pond and where frogs start, or they start as tadpoles, and then what would that mean? And so this whole learning process happened for the whole class, got involved. We created this frog pond. Then someone thought it would be really good to have yabbies, and then they were like, well, maybe we need a fish farm. So now we have a fish farm at our school because of that project. And then we just opened last week in our Harmony Garden because there was a beautiful student who was like, we need to attract more birds and butterflies to our school. And how do we do that? So then that sparked this whole interest of, well, what attracts birds and butterflies? Okay, well, these kind of plants do, and this is what we need. And so then the kids created this beautiful Harmony Garden, which was for their mental health, so they could go to when they needed to have some quiet, but also to bring butterflies and birds.
And suddenly we have Woodline Primary Zoo is opening up in 2025.
If I'm a student in your school, I'm writing a letter about giraffes. Like, how do we?
And when
that has been asked for, and Claire's actually gone, I don't think we can have, but she said to them, okay, I want you to go research what kind of permit do you need to get a giraffe.
Yeah, great.
Lael, I'm 15 years away from enrolling my kid.
Yeah.
Because I'm also 15 years away from having a kid.
Oh, we actually have a timeline.
Now we do. We have a school statement.
One of the other things that I love, and this was beautiful, one of our beautiful guides is a wedding celebrant, and in her class there was conversations about marriage and how to get married, and then all of a sudden they decided to have a Woodline wedding where these two teddies got married. Now, this was like the cutest thing. I just happened to be at the school the day, and I was like, what's going on? Claire's like, oh, there's a wedding today.
How
I'm like,
old
what?
were the students?
Now, what happened is the weeks leading up to it, the children had to write vows. They had to write invitations for everybody to come. They created a playlist of music, and then they talked about who was going to do this job, and someone was going to do catering. I cannot tell you the amount of numeracy and literacy that happened in that learning as the teacher rolled with it.
Solving. Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
Got
It
some
was
future
so-
event
Are you
managers.
also are you also decided on a timeline for marriage as well as children now?
Because Will, you know that I'm also a wedding celebrant, so I can do that for you at any time.
I'm going to go into the school.
This is so beautiful. Can I ask how old was this group of students?
So I think they were in grade 2.
It's so
grade 2 or
natural
3.
though. Like, I remember gathering all of my friends on the Oval in grade 1 for my first wedding. Like, it was so much fun. But it's like, this is life. This is real. And this is
How do we learn?
inquiry, project-based exploration.
How do we learn from this? So then, there's that one flip side. So it was beautiful. The whole school got involved. And I remember talking to the guide. She's like, wow, the amount of writing these kids have done. Because usually if you're sitting down, I need you to write me a story about a teddy bear. And they're like, but they were like so engaged in writing all the elements to it, which was beautiful. So we saw that it ticked that box. And then the flip side of that is, we had some yabbies, and we were looking at how they're creating the fish farm. And then one of the yabbies died, and one of the children was like, well, we need to have a funeral, right? This is a life cycle thing. So all of a sudden they started writing a eulogy for the yabby, and then they had another ceremony. And I was just watching with absolute delight at how life plays out and how there is learning in all elements of it. And so then what the children did as part of that, like the ceremony of life, we talked about bigger things around life and death, and just, the cycles of how life moves, which again brings in so much magic around science, around, just how the world works. And again, I think there is learning everywhere if we're open to seeing it. That's what I absolutely love.
And they're building connection. It's connecting through play. It's connecting through just exploring the world around them and following their curiosity.
Yes.
And I love that. And I wish that we could create more space for that in our education systems everywhere, because unfortunately not every primary school or secondary setting is like Woodline. I wish that we had more shared philosophies across this space. But if teachers could just have that permission and students could just have that permission to be able to tap into their curiosity, to really follow those paths that they're interested in, I think we would have a much more engaged cohort of young people that are entering the world.
Which I think is interesting too. I remember talking to an educator once, and he was talking to me about, he had a year 10 student who was really disengaged, had really hard stuff going on. And he's like, I just can't get him to do any work. And what do I do? And I was like, well, what's he into? And he's like, oh, he's really into football. And I was like, get him to write about football. I was like, just give him opportunities. You need him to write, then write about stuff he knows about, write about stuff he loves. Like, take the pressure off just this, because the idea here is we're just getting him to develop skills and understanding. And you know, he probably has zero interest in Macbeth or something like that. So, but what about football? He loves football. He could write about that. Totally. Can we be a little bit creative in allowing these beautiful kids that we work with, and knowing them well enough to, how do we bring something that lights them up, that, you know, creates those elements of playfulness and curiosity, because that's where we're going to get the best out of them, for sure.
Oh, and that's just so beautiful.
Such a nice place to kind of wrap this up too.
Wrap up this episode, with most of our audience being in the standard classroom, what is one element that you would provide advice for a teacher in a normal context that they can bring from Woodline into their classroom, in a typical classroom?
Yeah, I think I would be looking at, how do we bring more curiosity and playfulness to what we're doing? And sometimes it's just simple things, like exactly what you're saying, like bringing a witch's hat in. Like, sometimes it's about, let's push all the desks away, let's sit in a circle and let's talk about this in a different way. Let's just, I think, and I really do have compassion for this, because we are in such a stretched system. We're just trying to get through the day. Yeah. So adding any extra little element of, oh God, now I have to be creative, or now I have to be that, feels like an extra pressure. But I invite you to just play with it a little bit to see what happens, because you may get like incredible results out of your kids. You'll learn something no matter what, right? That happens, whether it's about how you connect with these students, or whether it's about, you know, something that does land or doesn't. You're going to learn something, but we can't keep doing the same thing and then expecting different results, right? It just doesn't work.
Yes. And so maybe we don't have a witch's hat and a cauldron, but maybe we do have a story, or maybe we do have something to pique curiosity. And the thing is that whilst this might take an extra few minutes to consider or prepare or whatever it might be, chances are not only are we going to have increased satisfaction in our profession, but we're going to have increased engagement, reduced quote unquote challenging behaviors, and we're going to see more uptake of the topic that we're inspiring.
But I also think, like, it's so much easier to just relax and be a little bit more playful than to be like, you know,
so rigid and trying to meet these things.
Following totally. Like, it's,
which is just teachers allowing themselves to be human, to be their authentic selves 100%. As well, when they're connecting with students in their classroom spaces.
I mean, I just even think, you think about something like Macbeth or Shakespeare or something, you know, there's often relationships, love stories. You're like, all right, if this was Olivia Rodrigo talking about this, what would she be saying? Right?
Totally.
Let's look at this theme, and then let's look at somebody that you know that's in your culture. How would they talk about this? What would they say? Like, let's break it down. They'll be like, oh yeah, she'd be saying this, this, and this. And you're like, beautiful.
I taught The Great Gatsby last year, Lael, and we did it as the date or no date list. So the students' task for the time we were studying the book was coming up with the qualities of why this person would be dateable or not dateable, or why they would be a good person to be. It's so rogue. But the students, they were so bought in, and they got into big debates about who would be the best person to date, and it was deemed at the end that not a single character is dateable in that entire book. But it was like, it was such a fun way to start looking at, and it's real life, right? It's like we're always reflecting on our relationships and our connections and friendships, and it's the same thing.
I'm sure they loved having you as their teacher, for sure. They'll be
they loved having you, and Lael, we have loved having you. Thank you so much for joining us today on Podclass as we've unpacked using play to connect. We admire your work. And Lael, where can our audience, where can our listeners find more to learn and listen?
And enroll their children.
Yes.
Yeah, and when are you opening a secondary school? Because that would be great as well.
No, I think one school's enough for me. Although I am supporting some another beautiful organisation in Queensland, in Currumbin, to open their school that's really similar to Woodline. So it's really beautiful to see that come to life. And I do hope that more schools like this pop up around. Yeah. You can find me at laelstone.com.au. I often joke that because I have a weird name, I'm the only Lael Stone when you Google it, which is handy. So you can find me there. And our school is woodlineprimary.com.au if anyone wants to have a look at that. Just about to launch our new website. So you can find all my bits and pieces online there and my podcast and all that kind of stuff.
And I personally recommend following Lael on Instagram too. I know you post some really inspirational just messages and reminders all the time, which make a big difference.
I'm curious on the quotes, Lael. To finish it off, what is your favourite quote?
To quote yourself.
Yeah, quote yourself or someone else or Brené Brown.
Since you are the Brené Brown of Australia.
That's tricky. Favourite quote.
Or it can just be one that's up there, you know?
Do you know what? I've just literally looked to my desk. I have this little thing here that says "Be brave," and I do love that because I think being our authentic self and it takes courage and bravery to be that in the world. And actually, the more authentic we are, the more permission it gives everybody else. And at the end of the day, I really do hope for us as humans that we get to stay deeply connected to who we are and be the most authentic version of ourselves. And then if we can operate from that place in the world, then I think a lot of magic's going to happen. So that was not a quote, but that was just
Perfect.
It was a Lael Stone quote.
It was perfect.
There you go.
Loved it. Thank you so much for joining us, Lael. We have been Podclass, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
Thanks so much for tuning into Podclass. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would adore it if you could go on to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. 5 stars would be lovely. We would love to get this podcast into as many ears as possible so we can help and support as many people as possible who help young people. And if you're not already doing so, please go along to Instagram and follow us at podclass.aus.